Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents A Fake Girlfriend for Chinese New Year by Jackie Lau. Narrated by Khristine Rivière. Chapter 1. Bouquet of flowers in hand, Zach Wong exited the grocery store and headed down Main Street. It was a crisp winter day in early January. The sun had shone brightly earlier, but now it was dusk, and there was a cool wind off Lake Huron. He passed the doctor's office, the dentist's office, and the pottery shop, which inexplicably had survived for a decade despite the lack of tourism in the sleepy lakeside town called Mosquito Bay. Next, there was the elementary school, the diner, the bakery, and 2 units that had been vacant for nearly a year. A few people were coming out of the Tim Hortons as he walked by. "Zach, haven't seen you in a while." Al, a bartender at Finn's, slapped him on the back. Zach's brothers didn't want to live in Mosquito Bay, didn't enjoy being in a community where everyone knew each other, and there was only one bar. But Zach liked it here. "I guess it's been longer than usual," Zach said. "You weren't working last Friday, right? How's the family up in Owen Sound?" "They're doing well. My old man broke his arm, though. Fell off a ladder when he was putting up Christmas lights." Al nodded at the flowers. "Who's the lucky lady?" Zach just smiled and shrugged. He talked to Al for a couple minutes, then walked onward, passing Wong's Walk, the restaurant his grandparents had run for decades. A typical small-town Chinese-Canadian restaurant. The new owners weren't named Wong, but they'd kept the name, not wanting to replace the sign. There was a sheet of paper in the window that said, "Now serving pad thai." That was new, too. There had been no pad thai back in his grandparents' day. Finn's was next door. Like Wong's Walk, there was no one named Finn there anymore, but the name had endured. Zach turned off Main Street and walked by Great Lakes Bed and Breakfast. It was another 5 minutes before he reached his destination. Though the front door was never locked, he rang the doorbell anyway. His mother answered. "For you," he said, handing her the bouquet as he stepped inside. "How lovely!" Mom enveloped him in a hug. "Thanks, Zach." "Where are my flowers?" Amma, his grandmother, asked as she shuffled into the hall. "Ah, I see. There are mums for your mum. It is not fair that there are no flowers called Ammas. They would be a bestseller. The biggest tropical flowers, bright pink." "No, they'd be poisonous," Aya said, coming up behind her. "Just like your cooking." He stepped to the side as his wife attempted to swat him. "My cooking isn't poisonous," Amma said. "You gave me food poisoning." "One time 40 years ago. You are always holding that over my head." She tried to swat Aya again, but he moved out of the way. They chased each other around the house, though it was hardly at a fast speed, as they were both close to 90. It was more like watching 2 tortoises run a race. Zach chuckled. He enjoyed being able to see his family at least once a week. His brothers, Greg and Nick, lived in Toronto, and he usually only saw them at holidays. Amber, his little sister, had moved to Stratford, which was an hour away. But Zach had stayed. Well, he'd gone away for university, but he'd come back after finishing teacher's college. "Stop it!" Dad entered the front hall. He looked at his parents and shook his head. "One of you will fall and break a hip, and that's the last thing we need." "No, I am strong. Big muscles." Amma stopped chasing her husband and attempted to flex her arm. Dad snorted, as did Aya. "Dinner is almost ready," Mom said. "How about you put the flowers in the vase and set the table, Zach?" 10 minutes later, he was digging into his roast chicken, potatoes, and green beans. Sunday night dinners with his family had become a tradition in the past few years. He and his grandparents would go to his parents' house, and his mom and dad would cook. Occasionally, Amber came too. "So, what did you do for New Year's?" Mom asked. "Did you kiss anyone at midnight?" Amma made smooching noises. "Did you go to any big parties?" I was at Finn's, Zach said. Nothing exciting. You didn't answer my first question, Amma complained. He laughed. No, I didn't kiss anyone. Amma shook her head. Greg and Nick have girlfriends now, but you... She pointed her finger at him as though accusing him of a heinous crime. You have not dated since Marianne, right? I keep my ears open. Nobody has said anything about you dating. We set you up with Diana, and that did not go well. But you, can try again. Zach felt a ball of tension in his stomach as he recalled Thanksgiving. His family had decided that since Zach, Nick, Greg, and Amber were all single, it would be a great idea to set them all up on blind dates. Although Zach's wasn't exactly a blind date, was it? He'd known Diana since childhood. Their families were friends, and Zach had been particularly good friends with Diana's older brother, Sebastian. Regardless, it had not gone well, though Nick had made out with Greg's date, and they were still together. At Christmas, Greg had convinced the family to help him make a snow fort for his high school girlfriend, and now they were a couple again, too. Zach was happy for his brothers. If that's what they wanted, it was great. But Zach had been in love once, and it hadn't ended well. In fact, it had ended with a diamond ring getting tossed in his face. So no, thank you. He wasn't interested in going through that again. Why keep doing something that brought you pain? He'd spent many long nights at the bar, not drinking himself into oblivion, but simply because he wanted to be somewhere other than the house he'd rented with Marianne. The one bright spot in all those late nights at Finn's, he'd become good friends with Joe. His engagement had ended more than 4 years ago, but Zach remembered exactly what it had been like. He didn't need to repeat. His family, however, seemed keen on him being in a relationship. There had been Thanksgiving's matchmaking extravaganza, and many comments since. Oh, do you know Lizzie, who works at Tim Hortons? She's Magda's daughter, and I thought we could set you up. Wasn't Lizzie cute in her corncob costume at the Harvest Festival? And now, the mention of New Year's reminded him of the next big family dinner, Chinese New Year. Would his family try to set him up with another woman? Unfortunately, the odds seemed good. True, there were no matchmaking efforts at Christmas for Zach, but he had a feeling they were biding their time, and the next family holiday would involve unwanted matchmaking for him and possibly Amber. What is going on, Zach? Amma asked. You are deep in thought. It is not like you. You are acting like Greg. Oh, nothing, he said. Just trying to prepare myself for work tomorrow. He shared pleasant conversation with his family and listened to Aya describe his latest finds on Amazon. But once dinner was over and he was walking home, he started thinking about Chinese New Year again. He couldn't bear more matchmaking with his mother's bridge partner's cousin's daughter, or the corncob costume lady who worked at Tim Hortons. He was happy with his life as it was. He enjoyed his job as a high school science teacher. He had lots of friends. He played in a hockey league on Monday nights. He had his family. No, it wasn't the exciting life that Marianne had wanted, but he liked it. He didn't need a replacement for his ex-fiancée. He did, however, need to take preventative measures to ensure he didn't have to suffer through more matchmaking at the next family holiday. Thanksgiving had been a shit show. What would dissuade his family? Well, the most effective thing would be if he already had a girlfriend. His family wouldn't set him up with anyone then. He didn't want a real girlfriend, but maybe he could get a fake girlfriend? He wasn't sure where the idea came from, but once it popped into his mind, it wouldn't leave. A fake girlfriend would be the perfect solution to his problem. He'd bring a woman to dinner on Chinese New Year, a woman of his choosing who knew the whole thing was an act. Zach had a bunch of female friends, but most of them were married or in relationships. However, there was one woman who would play the role perfectly. What would you like? Dr. Joe MacGregor asked. An elephant, a horse, or a dog? A dog! 6-year-old Savannah bounced in the dentist chair. A pink one or a yellow one?
Yellow.
Joe pumped air into the yellow balloon, then twisted it into the shape of a dog. She handed it to the little girl. Savannah frowned.
It's just like the horse she made me last time.
Savannah, said the girl's mother, Kyla. What do you say when someone gives you something?
Thank you,
Savannah said with a world-weary sigh. The girl was right. Joe's dog was identical to her horse, but nobody had complained. Until today. Joe suppressed a laugh. Fortunately, she was a better dentist than balloon animal artist, but usually the kids enjoyed the balloon animals. If you use your imagination, Joe said, I'm sure you can see that it's a very nice puppy. Savannah squinted at the balloon animal.
I see it now.
Having finished with her last patient of the day, Joe went over a few things, then returned home for a quick dinner before going out to the town's bar. She had plans every Friday night at Finn's. It was the highlight of her week, and she'd been thinking about it all day, as she'd looked in people's mouths and filled cavities and made unimpressive balloon animals. Here's your Guinness. Al set a pint in front of her. Thank you, she murmured, then returned to staring out the window, waiting for her friend as she sat at their usual table near the front. Sometimes he was a bit late, if he stopped to chat with someone on the walk over, but never more than 10 minutes. And there he was now, wearing his blue parka, a toque pulled low over his ears. He waved at her from outside, and she waved back, trying to tamp down the giddy feeling in her chest. Really, it was embarrassing that she felt like this around him. She was a 33-year-old woman, for God's sake, not a schoolgirl. How many of his students had crushes on him? She couldn't help wondering. Hey, she said as he walked up to the table. Zach Wong took off his toque, revealing his perfect dark brown hair. It was a little long and floppy, with a slight wave. Hugh Grant hair, she called it. It was unfair that his hair didn't get messed up when he put on a winter hat. Hers, on the other hand. Let's sit at the back today, he said. I have something to ask you. A handsome man was inviting her to the dark corner of the bar. Her heart beat a touch rapidly, even though she knew it didn't mean that. Sure, she said with a smile, gripping her pint as she followed him. When she was sitting down, she asked, What is it? Well, he said, the Lunar New Year is coming up soon. That's in February? This year, it's January 25th. I'm afraid my family is going to invite a date for me, like at Thanksgiving. So, I was wondering... He rested his elbow on the table and leaned closer to her. She inhaled his piney scent. Damn it, this attraction was so inconvenient. She'd known Zach since they were kids, but not well. She'd been 3 years ahead of him in school. Then one day 4 years ago, they'd both been drinking away their heartbreak at the bar, and they'd bonded over their broken engagements. They'd become friends, and 2 years ago, Joe had developed this inconvenient crush on Zach. Inconvenient because it was quite clear he had no interest in another relationship. Many times she told herself that she should stop meeting him for drinks, and maybe then she'd finally rid herself of these stupid feelings. Except every week, they met at Finn's. She couldn't help herself. She had a successful dental practice, which she'd taken over from her father after his retirement. She owned a cute little house on the edge of town. She could cook, she could garden, and she grew the best tomatoes on the block. She was pretty good at many things. And yet, I want you to come to my parents' house on Chinese New Year, Zach said, and pretend to be my girlfriend. A burst of laughter escaped Joe's lips, and with it, unfortunately, a mouthful of dark beer. It landed on Zach's sweater. Oh, God, she'd spit beer on Zach Wong. You want me to pretend to be your girlfriend? She asked as she grabbed a handful of napkins and started frantically dabbing at his sweater. She could feel his muscles underneath, and, that was nice. She leaned back. She should probably let him clean himself off. Yes, he said. I want you to be my fake girlfriend, so my family won't set me up with anyone for Chinese New Year. Well, There's a sentence that's never been uttered before in Mosquito Bay. Her cheeks flamed. I'm so sorry. About the beer, I mean.
It's no big deal.
That was Zach, never fazed by anything.
So, will you do it?
You think your family will believe we're together?
Why wouldn't they?
Won't it be a little suspicious if you suddenly show up with a girlfriend when you haven't mentioned a girlfriend before?
Good point.
He drummed his fingers on the table.
We'll have to go on dates in the next few weeks. Do something other than drinking at the bar every Friday. Then, my parents will hear about it through the gossip vine.
Yes, Jo said, with perhaps a little too much enthusiasm. She couldn't help it. Zach was asking her on a date. True, it was a fake date, but still, exciting times. God, she was pathetic. She had a sip of her beer and managed not to spit it on anyone this time, which she counted as a win. She would be Zach's fake girlfriend. She couldn't help herself from agreeing, but while they were pretending, she must absolutely not give away her feelings, or that might be the end of their friendship. Jo had a small circle of friends, and she didn't want to lose one. Would he want to kiss her as part of their act? Her hands flew to her mouth. Are you having second thoughts? Zach asked. No, it's fine. I'll do it.
Thanks.
He raised his pint, and she clinked hers against it.
I owe you.
Yes, you do, she said good-naturedly. They drank their beer in silence for a minute before Al came around and talked to Zach about hockey. Normally, Jo would join in, but today, she was lost in thought. She was going to get exactly what she wanted. Pity it would all be fake. Chapter 2.
More flowers for your mother?
Asked the cashier at Foodland.
Not this time.
Zach smiled at her, and she flushed. He knew his smile was powerful. It didn't make every woman drop to her knees, but when he wanted to fool around, he had little trouble finding a partner. He certainly hadn't been celibate since Marianne ended their engagement, but it wasn't like he was sleeping his way through all the single women in town.
Who's the lucky lady?
The cashier asked. This time, he shot her an enigmatic smile before exiting the grocery store. He had many different smiles, all for slightly different purposes. Zach drove the short distance to Jo's house in his old Ford Focus and knocked on her door. Strangely, his heart was thumping a little quickly, like he was nervous. But he was just spending the evening with a friend. No, he definitely wasn't nervous. There was no reason to be. The door opened, revealing Jo. She was wearing dark jeans and a brown sweater that hugged her curves. He'd likely seen her in this sweater before, but it looked really good on her. Her light brown hair fell in waves, and she wore silver earrings of some sort.
You look nice, he said,
swallowing. She fidgeted with her hair.
Nobody's around now. You don't have to pretend.
Her eyes lit up.
You brought me carnations. They're my favorite. How did you know?
To be honest, Zach hadn't even known they were carnations. He'd just seen the pink flowers and figured she'd like them. He shrugged.
Lucky guess.
Matt never got me flowers, even though I told him exactly what I liked. Matt was, frankly, a douche canoe. Not that Zach had ever met the man, but from the bits and pieces Jo had shared about her ex-fiancé over the years, it had become apparent that the guy had never deserved Jo, which was why she'd ended the engagement, because she'd realized she deserved better. After Jo put the flowers in the vase, Zach drove the two of them to Cardinal's, the nice-ish restaurant on the outskirts of town. The server, Jacob, a former student of Zach's who was maybe 19 now, seated them at a table by the window and kept tripping up over the list of specials.
We have pizza today with fresh rainbow trout. Or sardines. Anchovies. We also have ravioli stuffed with peppers? It started with a P. No, it wasn't peppers. Pumpkin, maybe? Shit, I'll go check. It's my second day on the job.
His face paled.
Sorry for saying shit. Damn it, I did it again.
Jo smiled at him kindly. Don't worry. I'm going to order the mussels, no matter what the specials are.
Oh, There's a mussel special, too. Our regular mussel entree has white wine, but I think the special one is cooked in ale?
Probably. They used to have that as a special every 2 weeks when I worked here.
You used to work at Cardinal's, Dr. MacGregor?
The kid asked. Yeah, in my last year of high school. The first day, I spilled seafood marinara all over a lady from out of town who was wearing a white silk blouse. The kid chuckled. Zach smiled at his date, trying to make their server feel more at ease. Joe wasn't as outgoing as he was, but she was good at this sort of thing.
What would you like today, Mr. Wong? Jacob asked. You can call me Zach, now that you've graduated.
Jacob looked at him as though this was a horrifying suggestion, even weirder than rainbow trout on pizza, which surely someone had tried before, but Zach didn't like seafood on pizza.
I couldn't call you that, Jacob sputtered. You're Mr. Wong. Okay, Mr. Wong if you prefer.
After they placed their orders, Jacob left and silence descended on the table. It was strange to be at a nice restaurant with Joe. When he saw her, it was usually at the bar.
I find it weird being called Mr. Wong outside of school, he said.
Yeah, I understand. I find it weird being called Dr. MacGregor outside the office. Dr. MacGregor is my father.
For me, I think it's partly because I don't look like I have a Chinese last name. I like my name, and people from Mosquito Bay know my family and don't question it. But students who are bussed in from other towns, other teachers, sometimes they ask, and it's awkward. Nick and Greg look more Chinese than I do. I look a bit like a white version of my dad. Does that sound strange?
Joe considered this for a second. I don't know what it's like, of course, but I understand what you're saying. Occasionally, people could tell Zach wasn't entirely white from his appearance. It was awkward when people played guessing games about his background and thought it was fun. He didn't talk about this stuff much, but there were other things he talked about with Joe that he didn't normally share. Although Zach had continued to act like his fun, relaxed self most of the time after his broken engagement, he'd talked to her about it a little. About his heartbreak, how he was hurt that the life he wanted was too boring and unfulfilling for Marianne, even though she'd initially been happy to move to Mosquito Bay. Still, it was Marianne's right to feel that way, and he was glad she'd ended it before they'd started planning the wedding. Facebook, the rare times he used it, told him that she now lived in Toronto, and she appeared to be enjoying herself there. Like Nick, she seemed to belong in the big city. He was happy for her, but it had hurt. You know who you look like? Joe asked suddenly, bringing him out of his thoughts.
Who?
Keanu Reeves.
You think I look like Keanu Reeves?
Yeah, a little. Did you see Always Be My Maybe? He was hilarious in that. Zach shook his head. But you look more like Matrix-era Keanu Reeves. You don't think so?
That's a big compliment. I'm not sure I can accept it. Are you saying you think I'm sexy?
He waggled his eyebrows. Joe's mouth fell open, and she paled. Shit.
Sorry, he said. It's not. Here's your bread and wine, Jacob said.
Zach's red wine nearly sloshed onto the white tablecloth, but Jacob managed to catch it just in time before he scurried to another table. Joe reached for her wine and had a gulp, then grabbed a piece of bread.
Again, I'm sorry, Zach said. I don't want to make you uncomfortable.
No worries. She plastered on a smile. It's fine. He could tell it wasn't, but also that she didn't want to talk about it. She took a sip of her wine, a sip, not a gulp this time, and fixed her hair. She really did look lovely tonight, but she wasn't for him. This was pretend, and she was his friend. He wasn't sure if she was willing to give a relationship another go. She hadn't talked about that recently, but he wasn't. His life was fine the way it was.
You think I'm sexy?
Dear God, it was a miracle Joe hadn't done more than open her mouth wide in horror. She did think Zach was very sexy, and he looked gorgeous in the black dress shirt he was wearing tonight. He looked a bit like Keanu Reeves. It was true. But why had she felt the need to tell him that? Zach had been playing around when he made that comment about being sexy, but could he tell the truth from how she'd reacted? She didn't think so. Still, it had made her jittery, made her feel like maybe he could read her mind. And oh, wasn't that a horrifying thought? But now everything was back on track. She was eating her mussels and slathering her bread with butter and dipping it in the juices, and it was all delicious. This had been her favorite meal when she'd worked here over a dozen years ago, and Cardinals hadn't changed much over the years. They served good food, but they'd never been on the cutting edge of trends, and the dining room hadn't been updated since she was a teenager. Across from her, Zach was cutting off a piece of his medium-rare steak, which, in her opinion, was the perfect way to cook a steak. And oh God, why did she keep finding more things to like about him? Though she usually prided herself on being upfront and honest, her secret crush on Zach was the exception. Only Tiffany knew. Jo was determined that no one else would ever find out. After they'd finished their meals, Jacob came over to clear their plates and recite the day's desserts. Jo really hoped today was fudge brownie day.
"We have 2 desserts," Jacob said. "Tiramisu and fudge brownie sundae."
"Did you say fudge brownie sundae?" Jo asked. After all, Jacob had messed up the anchovy pizza special earlier.
"Yeah."
"Not just fudge brownies with whipped cream?"
"No, fudge brownie sundae. It's new. Fudge brownies with vanilla ice cream, peanut butter ice cream, whipped cream, and chocolate sauce. Or fudge sauce? I don't know."
Jo wasn't quite sure what the difference between chocolate sauce and fudge sauce was, but that was a minor detail. It sounded amazing. Sure, it would be quite sweet and terrible for her teeth, but a woman had to have a few indulgences in life. And sure, she could probably eat it all by herself, but she was on a date with Zach Wong, and sharing a fudge brownie sundae would be a very datish thing to do. "What do you think, sweetie?" she said, the endearment popping out of her mouth before she could think about it. "Should we share it?"
"Sounds good."
He turned to Jacob.
"1 fudge brownie sundae." "Coming right up," Jacob said.
Once he'd left, Zach said,
"If you call me sweetie, what should I call you?"
"Darling." She dreamed of him calling her that.
"Darling it is."
They talked quietly for a few minutes until a high voice shouted,
"Dr. MacGregor!"
A little girl scampered toward their table. It was Savannah, wearing a purple party dress.
"I named my puppy Alfred,"
Savannah said. Jo smiled at her. "That's a good name for a dog."
"But Alfred wants a friend. Can you make me another balloon dog now? Please?"
"I'm sorry, I don't have any balloons with me."
"Oh."
Savannah twisted her mouth, then started back toward her family's table. She'd only taken 2 steps before she collided with Jacob, who was, of course, carrying a fudge brownie sundae, cherry on top. Jo saw what happened in slow motion. "Zach!" she cried. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough time for Zach to move out of the way before the fudge brownie sundae toppled off the tray. Chocolate sauce and ice cream spilled all over his hair and shirt, though he managed to catch the glass dish before it landed on his crotch. Oh dear. Zach, however, quickly recovered his composure. He held out his arms, looked at his ruined shirt, and said,
"Want some ice cream, darling?"
Jo sat in the passenger seat of Zach's car as he left the parking lot. Cardinals had quickly brought them a new sundae and comped their dessert and wine, and now their so-called date was over. They didn't say anything for a minute or two, and then Zach started to laugh. It was a contagious sort of laughter, because soon Jo was laughing too.
"People will definitely be talking about our date,"
Zach wheezed. "Which is exactly what you wanted."
"I didn't ask to have an ice cream sundae decorate my shirt." "You could start a hot new trend." "Cold trend, you mean?"
He glanced over at her, and her heart skipped a beat when he smiled like he didn't have a care in the world. Whereas if Jo had been on the receiving end of the spilled ice cream, she wouldn't have been a happy camper. After all, She was wearing a nice sweater for her first date with the man she'd had a crush on for 2 years.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?